The security scanner flashed bright red the second the old man stepped into the archive room. Employees froze as a warning filled the screen, record sealed. Subject presumed dead. Mark Ellison, a 29-year-old archivist, looked up from his desk and frowned. "Sir, you're not authorized to be here." The old man didn't argue. He simply removed a weathered envelope from inside his faded field jacket and placed it on the counter. "I'm here to correct a mistake," he said quietly. Mark almost laughed. The man looked at least 80 years old. His gray hair was thin, his jacket outdated by decades. "A mistake?" Mark asked. "You're listed as dead." The old man nodded. "That's the mistake." Several employees glanced over. One of them whispered that the system had been searching for that file for years. Mark rolled his eyes and opened the envelope. Inside was a burned map, a tarnished metal identification tag, and a faded unit patch stitched with the words Night Ledger. The room suddenly felt smaller. Before Mark could say another word, a woman rushed from a nearby office. Emily Carter, the center's lead military historian, stopped cold when she saw the patch. Her face turned pale. "Where did you get that?" she asked. The old man looked at her calmly. "They gave it to me in 1971. Emily's hands began to shake. For 6 years, she had searched through classified archives trying to prove Night Ledger had ever existed. Officially, the mission was a rumor. Unofficially, it was one of the greatest missing mysteries in military history. She grabbed her phone and stepped away. Less than 5 minutes later, a colonel from Washington was on the line. 10 minutes after that, an order arrived. "Do not let Walter Hayes leave the building." Mark stared at the old man. "Walter Hayes." The old man nodded once. Then the elevator doors opened. A 2-star general stepped out surrounded by aides. Every employee stood. The general ignored everyone and walked straight toward the old man. Then, to Mark's complete shock, he snapped to attention and saluted. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice heavy with respect, "we've been looking for you for 23 years. The archive room fell silent. Walter slowly looked at the burned map still lying on the counter. "Then you're ready to hear what really happened that night. Dead men aren't supposed to walk into government archives." The security scanner flashed bright red the moment the old man stepped through the glass doors. A sharp electronic tone cut across the quiet room, echoing between rows of steel shelves packed with decades of military records. Heads turned immediately. Conversations stopped. Fingers froze above keyboards. For a brief second, the entire archive room seemed to hold its breath. The warning on the monitor was impossible to ignore. Record sealed. Subject presumed dead. Mark Ellison frowned at the screen. At 29 years old, he had worked at the National Military Records Center for almost 4 years. He had seen corrupted files, classified files, even records so restricted they appeared as blank pages. He had never seen this. Not once. He looked up. Standing quietly in front of the security checkpoint was an elderly man wearing a faded olive jacket that looked older than most of the employees in the building. His white hair was thin. His shoulders were slightly stooped. Yet there was something unusual about him. He stood completely still. No confusion. No embarrassment. No concern. Almost as if he had expected the alarm to happen. Mark stepped away from his desk. "Sir, I think there's been some kind of mistake." The old man looked at him with pale blue eyes. Calm eyes. Patient eyes. Eyes that seemed untouched by the tension spreading through the room. "There has," he said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel worn smooth by time. "That's why I'm here." A few employees exchanged curious glances. Mark forced a polite smile. "Do you have an appointment?" "No identification." The old man reached into his jacket pocket and produced a worn leather wallet. The leather was cracked at the edges and softened by decades of use. Mark opened it. The ID card inside looked perfectly legitimate. Walter Hayes, age 84. But the moment Mark entered the information into the system, the red warning appeared again. Record sealed. Subject presumed dead. Mark stared at the screen, then at Walter, then back at the screen. "That's not possible." Walter nodded once. "I know." The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Somewhere in the distance, an air conditioning vent rattled. Nobody moved. Nobody returned to work. Every eye in the room remained fixed on the strange old man standing beside the checkpoint. Mark cleared his throat. "Sir, according to this system, you died more than 20 years ago." Walter's expression never changed. "Then the system is wrong." The answer should have sounded ridiculous. Instead, It landed with an unsettling weight. Mark suddenly realized the old man wasn't trying to convince anyone. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't defending himself. He was simply stating a fact. Walter slowly removed a large yellow envelope from inside his jacket and placed it on the counter. The paper was faded from age. The corners were worn. It looked like it had traveled thousands of miles and survived countless years. "What's that?" Mark asked. Walter rested one weathered hand on the envelope. "The reason your people have been looking for me." The room fell silent. Several employees frowned. Others exchanged puzzled looks. Mark almost laughed. "Looking for you?" Walter glanced toward the endless rows of records stretching through the building. Then he looked back at Mark. For a very long time, Mark Ellison stared at the envelope for several long seconds. The archive room had returned to silence, but it was no longer the ordinary silence of paperwork and computer screens. It was the kind of silence that appears when people sense that something unusual is unfolding in front of them. Walter Hayes stood patiently at the counter, one hand resting on the faded envelope as if he had carried it for a lifetime. Perhaps he had. Mark finally reached for it. "May I?" Walter nodded once. The paper felt surprisingly heavy. Not physically heavy, but important. The kind of object that seemed to contain more than its weight could explain. Mark carefully opened the flap. A faint smell drifted out. Old paper. Dust. Time. Inside were only 3 items. A folded map with darkened edges. A tarnished metal identification tag. And a faded cloth patch. Mark frowned. He had expected documents. Military orders. Letters. Something official. Instead, he found objects that looked like they belonged in a museum display case. "This is it?" he asked. Walter said nothing. Mark lifted the patch first. The fabric was worn thin. The colors had nearly disappeared. Only a black silhouette remained visible beneath decades of age. A bird with outstretched wings above unfamiliar lettering. Night Ledger. The name meant nothing to him. Around the room, employees gradually lost interest and returned to their desks. The mystery seemed less dramatic now. Just another elderly veteran carrying old memorabilia. Mark almost set the patch aside when a voice suddenly interrupted him. "Where did you get that?" The question came from across the room. Mark looked up. Emily Carter had stopped walking midway between 2 rows of filing cabinets. A stack of folders slipped slightly in her arms. Her eyes were fixed entirely on the patch. Mark blinked. "What?" Emily moved closer. Faster than usual. Her expression had changed completely. "The patch," she said quietly. "Where did you get it?" Walter looked at her for the first time. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he answered, "It belonged to my unit." Emily stared at him. "That is impossible." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the building, an elevator bell chimed softly. Walter remained calm. "A lot of people have said that." Emily carefully set her folders down on a nearby desk. Her breathing had become noticeably slower. More controlled, like someone trying to remain calm after receiving unexpected news. Mark looked between them. "What is Night Ledger?" Emily did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached for the patch with almost reverent caution. Her fingertips stopped just short of touching it. "For 6 years," she finally said, "I have been researching references to that name." Mark frowned. "And?" Emily swallowed. "And every file ends the same way." The room suddenly felt colder. Walter's expression never changed. Emily looked directly at him. "Every document says the personnel connected to Night Ledger disappeared." Mark laughed nervously. "Disappeared?" Emily ignored him. Her eyes remained locked on Walter Hayes. No photographs. No service records. No confirmed identities. Just fragments. Walter slowly lowered himself into a nearby chair. The metal frame creaked softly beneath his weight. Then he looked toward the endless shelves stretching into the distance. Thousands upon thousands of boxes. Millions of pages. Decades of history carefully preserved. "That is because," he said quietly, "most of the story was never written down."